This is the pace of change with digitization. It's going to lead us in the next few years to what I like to call experience media. I was talking to a group of media executives about this not long ago, and I said the time is coming shortly when people will have VR concerts. You won't have to go to a physical venue. If you choose to, you can put your gear on, whether it's glasses or some new device, and you can have a virtual concert with holograms involved and haptic technology that fools not just sight, sound, and touch, but smell and taste as well. Sociable media. Anybody heard of this? Sociable media is the next iteration of social media. Sociable media is where your avatar, your three-dimensional representation in digital space, meets with your friend's avatar in an imaginary space and has coffee together. To such a degree that the haptics are so good that you actually feel like you're in that room with that. But you know you're not, but you feel like you are. This is what I'm calling sociable media. We have brain-machine interfaces beginning to develop now. Free University of Berlin a few years ago came out with its brain driver car. It called it brain driver because it was driven with nothing more than brain waves. A skull cap was worn by the person sitting in the driver's seat, and brain waves were read to drive the car. Facebook, probably the least best candidate for this, the one that I would least like to see using it, is developing by 2020 what it calls non-invasive onboard cameras that provide optical imaging so that you don't need to type in what you want from Facebook. It can read from your optical imaging what you're thinking. Now, as I said, I'm not really sure I want the Zuck to have that much power, given his recent record with data breaches. But this is part of the technology that's coming down the pike in the next just 2 or 3 years. There are challenges with digital. Some of you have heard me address some of these before, but I'm going to lay some other ones on you today. One of them is cognition and productivity. How we think is being changed by the way we use devices. If you're leading a company or want to lead a company, you need to understand how digital will affect the team that you're building. For one thing, digital allows confirmation bias. Once upon a time, not that long ago, pre-digital, it was a lot harder to have your particular prejudices or belief confirmed by other people. You might have to talk to 20 or 30 people before you found a group that actually believed what you believe. You with me? Today you can do it almost instantly. You just look for the hashtag. Find the right hashtag and you've found a group, a little tribe, or a cyber tribe that you can belong to who completely shares your belief, prejudice, or bias. Now, the bad news with that is it stops you having to interact with people who don't agree with you. So your worldview is not challenged, it's not stretched, it's not strengthened or changed as a result. We have the challenge of digital dementia. That's my term. About 8 years ago, I was in the media a lot talking about this because a study had been released internationally showing that the age when dementia begins is not 65, as we used to think, but 45. And I asked the question, if we started another study today for 10 years, would we find after that 10 years that things we now associate with dementia, like confusion, short-term memory loss, trouble with numbers, that these things actually become normal brain function because we've relegated so many activities to machines. We gave up arithmetic years ago to pocket calculators. Some of you might remember what a pocket calculator is. Those of you that don't, grab your ancient history. Then we started relegating spelling to predictive text. Then we started sat-navs, tom-toms and others. Now it's on our phones. We don't even have to navigate. We have no sense of direction anymore. And we mediate many of our relationships via screens. What happens to the areas of our brains that are normally responsible for those activities? Do they atrophy? Do they weaken over time? There's a certain amount of evidence now emerging that they do. So this could be a challenge. Addiction is a problem with the internet, especially addiction to dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical that is associated with feelings of pleasure and hyper-alertness. People often take dopamine to stay awake to study for exams. Some of you might have taken it this morning, although looking around I see there's no candidates. Dopamine is injected into your bloodstream through social media. For one thing, through the instant gratification that comes through social media. You turn on your Facebook or Instagram or Twitter account and there's somebody has liked your kitty cat photo or your demented dog tricks film. And you enjoy that and there's an instant kick out of it. That's a little dose of dopamine. Anticipation. When you open the account, you're anticipating, will there be someone, won't there be someone? That's a little dose of dopamine. The risk, will they like what I just said or won't they? That's another little dose of dopamine. These are only small doses, but how many know that small doses of a chemical taken over time can cumulatively have the same effect, sometimes as a relatively large dose? So medicos are now identifying this as an addiction. It's now listed in the clinical medical records of the United States as an addiction, internet addiction. False equivalence is something we don't often talk about when it comes to the digital world. False equivalence is where you have two ideas or two viewpoints that are given equal weight, even though one of them is clearly illogical or just downright stupid. You see this all the time on social media. You have people forming little groups propagating an idea that is just illogical. It doesn't even stand up to reason within itself. And yet, then people who argue with it say, well, with all due respect to your idea, and I can see why you would believe that, let me give my idea, which really is a false way of dealing with falsehood. You have to confront it. You have to be nicely able to say, well, I don't agree. I think you're wrong for these reasons. And I'm not going to pander to you by trying to tell you, well, yeah, I understand your idea and why, you know. Sometimes there's a false equivalence in social media. Here's a big one, machine confusion. How many of you read a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, that Google announced it had built a chatbot that was communicating with a hairdresser, a human hairdresser, to book appointments, to style hair in a certain way, to talk in detail about what was going to happen in the appointment. The hairdresser did not know it was a chatbot, so it passed the Turing test. It sounded like a human being. And Google proudly announced, well, this gives us the possibility now of having our own vocal avatars that can go online and book you a restaurant, maybe even in time talk to your bank manager about getting you a loan, maybe even a little further down the road, sealing that business deal for you. This is exciting stuff, said Google. And it is, to a point. It sounds very nice, but what about people who don't want to talk to a machine just because it is a machine? Shouldn't they be informed that they're talking to a machine? So suddenly, Google backtracked and said, well, actually, we're building something in now so that we inform you in advance. But they only did it because people were up in arms about it. And this is a problem in some of our big tech companies today. It seems that they don't think about the human values of what they're proposing. They don't really think about what we as consumers might feel emotionally or psychologically about the products they offer. And that is a challenge because pragmatism is driving their decisions. If it can be done, we should do it. Facebook says if it can be done, we should do it. Only later when someone complains and the government gets up in arms, do we want to change it? Are you still with me this morning? How many people are still awake? Good. By the way, what I just said there features in a new video thing we're starting to do in about a month's time. Every 2 weeks, a 3-minute video comes out on an issue relating to social change, the future, innovation, or leadership. And you can find it on all of our social media streams in about 3 weeks from now, plus our YouTube channel. All of our media streams, Instagram is just @Mal Fletcher, Twitter is just @Mal Fletcher, LinkedIn, just put my name in, YouTube, we have a Mal Fletcher channel there, and on our website, 2020plus.net. So if you don't have to sign up for it. We don't want you to sign up for it. We just want you to go and sign into one of those streams and you'll get this stuff. And there's a lot of research goes into it. It's kind of as substantial as what I'm giving you this morning, just delivered in a completely different. I was a TV producer for a long time, so I know a little bit about how to present to a camera. And I really want you to get hold of this stuff because it's the sort of stuff, you don't have to retweet it. You can just use it yourself and impress your friends. Reflection is a big problem when it comes to the digital world. John Dewey, the philosopher and writer, said, we do not learn from experience, but from reflecting on experience. You know, we don't learn from stuff that happens to us. We learn when we start reflecting on it. We start thinking, what does this mean to me? How do I feel about this? It's not the event, it's our reflection that adds value or not. And the Vanderbilt University recently came out with a study that backs this up. It said, and some of us have suspected this, I'm sure, for a long time, and those working in sports science know about this. Imagining performing a task has more benefit for productivity than practicing it over and over and over again. Sitting down and imagining yourself doing that task in detail, not just generics, in detail, from one step to the other. It's like muscle memory. It actually improves your performance more than practicing that thing over and over. Now, I was saying to some urban planners recently that we need to start building space for reflection into the built environment. If you're a designer here today, or someone who has pretensions to be, ambitions to be a designer of space, whether it's architecturally or in landscape terms, or you want to be in urban governance, this is important to you. We need to build room for people to reflect in an age of digital. So pop-up architecture becomes important. You know, those pop-ups, they're only there for 2 or 3 weeks. It might be a restaurant. It could be a museum. We need pop-up museums in Berlin, on the tops of buildings, in the foyers of large auditoriums. We need pop-up architecture where people can just go and look at paintings for a while, an art gallery, a pop-up chamber music where they can listen to a 3 or 4 piece chamber group for a while. Maybe these people are volunteers. Maybe you as a business leader pay for this to happen. People will love you for it, switching off their digital for a while and getting some reflection space. Reading pods, where we encourage people not to read on digital, but to pick up something on paper. Maybe there are books sitting there and they just read it. You can imagine a room like this becoming a great little pop-up museum. It's only there for 3 weeks, 2 weeks, a month, and then it's gone. And it goes somewhere else. Some of you, we need to think like this, ladies and gentlemen, in the age in which we live. Surveillance is a challenge, isn't it, in the age of digital? Alexa, just a few weeks ago, Amazon's Alexa recorded a conversation that a couple had in their home and then sent copies of the recording to their neighbors. It was just a glitch in the system, and thankfully they weren't talking about their neighbors at the time. But again, we see another example of what I call attentive technology. Big data is wonderful, but it's a form of soft surveillance. We have biohacking beginning to occur. The 3 Square Market company in the USA is offering their workers right now the opportunity to have subcutaneous chips, that is, chips under their skin, which allow them to open security doors and run photocopiers and buy things at work. And it sounds all very cool and very sexy. But what happens when the company stops offering this and starts requiring this? We have precious little privacy at work now, as it is. There are companies in America, many of them, that track every single keystroke of their workers. They're doing it for legal reasons, to protect themselves legally, but it's essentially an invasion of privacy for their workers. And what happens when we come to hacking? Any computer device can be hacked into. We have to ask the question, do we want our bodies to be hackable and trackable devices? Your phone is now, but it's not you, is it? I know it feels like it is some days. It's another organ of your body, this phone. But it isn't you. Imagine if it was you. Imagine if your body became a hackable, trackable devices.